Who Shot Mr. Burns is the murder mystery finale of season 6 of The Simpsons, screened in May 1995. It was a two-parter that was not resolved until the premiere of season 7, which was 4 months later. This was around prime Simpsons golden era. You know, before they did this. Why? The Simpsons in the 90s was insane, like the peak of the fandom, and ripe for exploitation. Like this, and this,
move it on the double, cause if you don't, you're in deep, deep trouble.
And whatever this is. So this whodunit was the hot topic of the summer of 1995, other than, I don't know, Casper.
Can I keep you?
No, don't like that. There was a special edition of America's Most Wanted, and even a real contest that nobody won because only one person who got it correct entered whilst they were in university, and then left the university during the summer. So, a bit of a dumb mistake there, probably from watching too many cartoons. To keep everyone guessing behind the scenes, multiple endings were scripted, voiced, and animated, until finally, we all found out it was Maggie. I remember when I first saw Who Shot Mr. Burns, and my theory was that it was Krusty the Clown, because there was that episode where Homer went to clown college and he looked exactly like Krusty with makeup on. So I thought, what if Krusty took the makeup off to resemble Homer? And then shot Mr. Burns, who would not know who he is because he doesn't know who Homer is. And the W and the S on the sundial is for what's his name, Simpson, and thus there's like zero evidence it was Krusty the Clown. I just did it because I was like, ooh, he turns up late to the town meeting. I bet that's a clue, you fucking idiot. In 95, the internet was kind of really in its early days. We still had the dial-up modem, and I was big on chat rooms, and I remember joining a chat room, I think it was CompuServe or something like that, and wanting to join in the conversation, but no one was really talking to me, so I brought up, hey, I wonder who shot Mr. Burns, and that immediately steered the conversation to The Simpsons. I just remember that kind of made me feel good. It made me feel like I made friends on the internet, when, of course, we know there's no such thing. Co-writer Josh Weinstein released a pitch document that summarized the episode idea. It's obviously still in a very early rough stage, but they knew that this mystery could not be a cop-out. It had to have an actual person, not just a gunman that turns up at the last second randomly. They considered it to be Barney for a while, who could then actually leave the show. They actually wanted the person to be punished, so Barney would have left for like a season and then came back later. But the show is The Simpsons, so it had to be a Simpson. And it just made Maggie the perfect culprit because she could actually fairly escape the punishment, and the audiences won't feel cheated by that. And no, this video isn't about who really shot Mr. Burns, because it was Maggie. It was Maggie, it was the baby, okay? While planning the episode, special consideration was given to making it actually solvable. A real puzzle with real clues pointing to the real culprit. So this is my stupid over-analysis of how you can solve the mystery of who shot Mr. Burns with just the first part alone to prove it was actually Maggie. It can't be anyone else other than Maggie. First, a quick summary of the plot. Springfield Elementary strikes oil and is about to become filthy rich.
Hey, can you throw me another Capri Sun?
Until Mr. Burns taps the oil for himself, which floods Moe's tavern with fumes, sinks the retirement home, and destroys Bart's treehouse. Meanwhile, Smithers is fired after Mr. Burns reveals his plan to block the sun, and also he can't remember Homer's name. Mr. Burns is easily his most evil in this episode, and this is in order to make everyone believably become a suspect, which is what Part 1 spends most of its time doing, setting up the motivations for everyone in Springfield. The suspects are grouped into primary, secondary, and tertiary. Third kind. Primary are mainly Homer, as Mr. Burns can't remember his name, and Smithers for getting fired and having his heart broken. But with them are Bart Simpson for injuring his dog, Lisa Simpson, Principal Skinner, and groundskeeper Willie for robbing the school of its money, Abraham Simpson for ruining his retirement home, and Moe and Barney for ruining the bar. Secondary suspects are mainly those who are also affected by Burns' actions, so the other people of the retirement home, like Jasper, an old Jewish man. Yes, that's his name. Other teachers and students of the school, like Superintendent Chalmers, Mrs. Krabappel, or Tito Puente, and so on. Tertiary suspects are everyone else in Springfield, given the blocking of the sun would affect them all. So since the majority of the episode is dedicated exclusively to setting up motives, what actual clues are there? 1. Mr. Burns recognizes his shooter.
Oh, it's you. What are you so happy about?
2. Burns struggles against them.
I said drop it.
3. The type of gun wound he has. 4. His own gun is missing by the position he falls on the sundial. If we look again at our prime suspects, we can actually strike them all off using a process of elimination based on these clues. Mr. Burns recognizing his shooter. Immediately we know it cannot be Homer. This episode firmly establishes that Mr. Burns never remembers him over and over again. In this episode, we see Mr. Burns interact with Smithers and Skinner and recognize everyone in the Simpson photo, apart from Homer. But that leaves Grandpa Simpson, Moe, Barney, and groundskeeper Willie. Mr. Burns never interacts with these characters in this episode, so would he actually recognize any of them now? In fact, has Mr. Burns ever actually met these characters prior to this episode, excluding any Treehouse of Horror episodes, any retcon episodes, any couch gags, or any episodes that are actually set in the future? And reminder, this is about if Mr. Burns would recognize them, not if they would recognize him. But to investigate that, you would have to look into every episode that Mr. Burns appears in, cross-reference it with every episode the other characters appear in, and then watch all those episodes, which are probably going to be like 50 or 60 episodes, just to work out if any point those characters ever interact. And who would be stupid enough to do all that work for something so incredibly pointless? So here's what I found. Season 6, Episode 12, Homer the Great. Mr. Burns, Grandpa, Barney, Moe, and Willie are all part of the Stonecutters, but Mr. Burns doesn't actually interact with any of them, and they technically don't call each other by name.
Call each other by number, not by name.
Season 6, Episode 18, A Star is Burns. Mr. Burns loses to Barney's movie during the film festival, so despite not interacting with him or mentioning his name, he would in theory remember him, and probably Moe as well, but that feels like a stretch. Season 5, Episode 21, Lady Bouvier's Lover. Mr. Burns is about to marry Marge's mother, but when Grandpa Simpson stops it, I think that's fair to say Mr. Burns would remember that. Season 3, Episode 11, Burns vs The Kraftwerk. After selling the power plant, Mr. Burns actually goes to Moe's tavern to order a drink. He speaks to Moe, but immediately Homer interrupts him before any actual exchange happens. They all then mock him until he leaves. Again, it feels like a stretch that Moe would be specifically remembered for this. Although at one point, Mr. Burns does actually play bowls with Grandpa Simpson. Season 3, Episode 3, When Flanders Fail. Moe, Barney, and Mr. Burns all visit the Leftorium as they're all left-handed. They don't actually speak to each other, but they uncharacteristically join in the song.
Stick out that noble chin.
Season 2, Episode 13, Homer vs. Lisa and the Eighth Commandment. Mr. Burns goes to the Simpson house to watch the boxing match. He speaks to Barney, initially thinking he's Homer, plus Grandpa and Moe are there too. Season 2, Episode 17, Old Money. Mr. Burns actually turns up to Grandpa's to plead for his money. Season 2, Episode 18, Brush with Greatness. Both Moe and Barney are for some reason at the unveiling of the painting. Mr. Burns doesn't speak to either of them. Season 1, Episode 8, The Telltale Head. Mr. Burns is part of the angry mob along with Grandpa, Moe, and Barney. And Moe and Mr. Burns actually speak. This is like the most they ever talk.
The child seems rattled.
Can you blame?
No.
Wow. So, from that, I can conclude that Mr. Burns would remember Grandpa and Barney, and maybe Moe at a stretch, but not Willie.
What?
From Season 1 to Season 6, Mr. Burns and groundskeeper Willie have never interacted at any point, so therefore, Mr. Burns would not recognize him. What a fantastic waste of time. Burns' struggle. Mr. Burns is frequently framed to be a very weak and frail old man. Even his attempted attack on Skinner did nothing. For Mr. Burns to actually tussle with the gunman, that means the gunman would have to be weak themselves, so either a child, an old man, or drunk. So that can't be Skinner or Willie. Despite being a barkeep, Moe hasn't really ever shown himself to be a heavy drinker. Homer is no stranger to a drink, of course, but isn't actually shown drinking or drunk during the town hall meeting. So that only leaves Smithers and Barney being the drunks, along with Bart, Lisa, and Abe being children and old person respectively. The gun wound. The gun wound Mr. Burns has is a relatively small puncture. Now, I'm no gunshotologist, but during the town hall meeting, several people are shown stroking guns. Moe is shown to have a shotgun, which would have way more damage on Mr. Burns' frail body. Also, Skinner is shown to have a suppressor on his gun, yet a gunshot is heard. So neither of them could have shot Mr. Burns. But it's also worth noting Burns' gun. With a little freeze framing, you can see that Mr. Burns' gun is missing. Therefore, we can assume that he was shot with his own gun, implying that the gunman didn't have one of their own. Other than Grandpa, only Bart knew about the Smith & Wesson, but Marge buried it in secret, yet is shown to be missing. And Smithers, Skinner, Moe and Barney are shown to have guns. In theory, the only people who would probably not have a gun on the time of Mr. Burns' shooting is Homer, Lisa, and Willie. The sundial. When Mr. Burns falls on the sundial, he points to west and south, a hint of the gunman's initials. This could be Waylon Smithers, W. Seymour Skinner, Smith & Wesson, Scottish Willie. Ah, like a penis. However, throughout this episode, there are clocks set to
3 p.m.
The whole point of the clocks is to teach you to see the clock at the end, the sundial, upside down.
Which opens up more possibilities, such as Moe Sislak. In fact, in cases like Moe and Skinner, their full names are revealed for the first time in this episode purely to tie in to the sundial clue. It's worth noting there's other symbolism like this, such as the exit only sign forming a no arrow pointing at Homer's head, but then there's this oil rig that seems like it's making a yes arrow pointing at Smithers, so maybe not. So when you look at it, almost no one of the prime suspects fits all the clues. The closest you kind of get is Smithers, Bart and Grandpa, but there's actually 2 more clues that prove it's not them. Pardon my zinger. Mr. Smithers admits he never misses an episode of Pardon My Zinger.
I never miss Pardon My Zinger.
A point which is raised in part 2. But during the episode, a TV screen in Moe's Tavern shows Pardon My Zinger advertised to be playing at 3 p.m. The time that Mr. Burns is shot. In fact, we can see Waylon Smithers leave the town hall in the opposite direction to Mr. Burns, which brings me to the final clue, the model town layout. When Mr. Burns reveals the plans to block the sun, he demonstrates with a miniature model of Springfield, which shows the layout of the whole town. Whilst Mr. Smithers points out the sundial, we can use this to track where Mr. Burns goes when he leaves the town hall. He walks around the building to the car park. It is here he is shot. And who is the only person in the car park with Mr. Burns at this time? It was Santa's little helper. It was the dog. It was definitely the dog from the episode when he introduced the sundial to the Simpson mutt, which is a reference to how he killed the dog. No, wait, sorry. I mean Maggie Simpson. It's alluded to with Mr. Burns' attempt to steal candy from a baby. He recognizes her from the photograph. She's even the only one who doesn't avert her eyes when challenged by Mr. Burns. It's absolutely remarkable that not only did the creators manage to create a genuine 2-parter whodunit that is actually solvable with the first episode alone, but it's also still really funny. Like, the murder mystery aspect didn't bog down the jokes, and it remains as one of the greatest and most memorable Simpsons episodes of all time. And I like that. So yeah, that's my video on Who Shot Mr. Burns. What do you think of this format? I'm trying something new here. If you dig this, then I've got, more video ideas. So let me know what you think. I mean, I'm probably going to do them anyway, but unless this video gets an overwhelming negative response, then I'll probably just crawl in a hole and die. I won't do that. I'll just live the rest of my life in the hole. I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm sorry. Bye.